had been driving for hours. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the thick darkness of the night. I should have stopped earlier, but something about those gas station parking lots made me uneasy. Too exposed, too many wandering eyes. So when I spotted a narrow dirt road leading into a clearing, I took it. The place was perfect, secluded, quiet, no sign of life for miles. Just me and my RV parked in the middle of nowhere. I killed the engine. Total silence. Not even the sound of crickets. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world just stopped. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and settled into bed. It was just another night. Until it wasn't. I woke up abruptly, my chest tight with unease. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. A bad dream, a strange noise, and then I felt it. The sensation of being watched. My pulse quickened. My RV was parked in the middle of nowhere. No people, no houses. So why did it feel like someone was standing right outside? I held my breath and listened. Silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was heavy, unnatural. Slowly, I reached for the curtain beside me. My fingers hesitated. Did I really want to see? I pulled it back just an inch, and there he was. A man standing right outside the window, motionless, staring directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. The man outside wasn't moving, not shifting his weight, not blinking, not even breathing. He just stood there, his face partially obscured by the darkness, but his eyes never left mine. A wave of nausea hit me. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he needed help. But no one just stands there like that. I lurched back, heart hammering against my ribs. My hands fumbled for my keys. I needed to leave. Now, I jammed them into the ignition, twisted. Nothing. The engine refused to turn over. I tried again. Click, click. Silence. I dared one more glance at the window. He was still there, still watching. But now, it had curled into a faint, unnatural smile. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I couldn't stay here. I needed to think. Maybe if I grabbed something, a weapon, anything, I could at least feel like I had a chance. I turned my head toward the kitchen, eyes scanning for a knife. And then because I saw it. Not just one face in the window. All the windows. Every single one of them. Men, women, dozens of them. Standing completely still, pressed against the glass, their eyes fixed on me. Their hands, pale and smudged, pressed against the glass like they were waiting for something. My stomach twisted into knots. I had no idea how long they had been there. And worse, how had I not heard them arrive? I couldn't breathe. Every window was filled with motionless figures, their faces inches from the glass, their expressions eerily blank. They weren't banging, weren't trying to break in, just watching. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but my body refused to listen. The RV felt smaller, the air heavier, like their silent stares were pressing in on me. Then, a single deliberate movement. One of them, a tall man with hollow eyes, slowly lifted his hand and dragged his fingers down the window, leaving greasy streaks behind. My stomach twisted. They were real. I forced myself to think. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. They couldn't get in. But then, how did I hear footsteps inside earlier? My breath hitched. I wasn't alone in here. I turned my head toward the hallway leading to the back of the RV, my ears straining for any sound. And that's when I heard it. A single shallow breath, right behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. The small kitchen, the tiny bathroom, the narrow hallway. All empty. But the breath. I had heard it. The RV creaked softly. The air felt wrong. I wasn't imagining it. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy flashlight, and gripped it tight. If something was in here with me, I wasn't going down without a fight. The figures outside hadn't moved. Their empty stares bore into me as if they were waiting for something. And then, a whisper. Soft, distant, but inside the RV. "Let us in." My throat went dry. The voice was wrong. Too soft, too distant, as if it wasn't coming from a person at all, but from the walls themselves. I clutched the flashlight tighter. "No." The RV lurched. The entire vehicle shook violently, throwing me forward. I hit the floor, pain shooting through my shoulder, and suddenly, all the whispers stopped. The shaking ceased. I scrambled to my feet, breathing hard. I turned back toward the windows, my pulse pounding. They were gone. All of them. Every single one of them had vanished. My RV was completely surrounded just moments ago. There was no way they could have left that fast. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I didn't care what had just happened. I needed to leave. I turned the key again. The engine roared to life. The relief was so overwhelming I almost laughed. I threw the RV into drive and stomped on the gas. I didn't look back, but as I pulled onto the road, headlights cutting through the thick darkness, I caught one final glimpse in the rearview mirror. A single face, watching from the trees. It wasn't smiling anymore. It was frowning, like it was disappointed. The RV roared down the dark, empty highway. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be as far away from that place as possible. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles had turned white. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the sound of the tires against the asphalt. But no matter how far I drove, the feeling didn't go away. That pressure, that unbearable sense of being watched. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. The road behind me was empty, the trees nothing more than black silhouettes against the night sky. And yet, my skin prickled. I knew, deep in my bones, that something was still there. I reached for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, just to hear another human voice. My fingers trembled as I swiped at the screen. No service, of course. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on the road. Just keep driving. The sun would rise eventually. I just needed to hold out until then. Then, a shadow moved in my peripheral vision, inside the RV. I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. My body refused to move, my muscles locking up in sheer primal terror. The headlights illuminated an old road sign up ahead. Next town, 12 miles, almost there. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror just for a second, and my stomach dropped. A shape was standing in the hallway behind me. Tall, still. I couldn't make out its features, but I didn't need to. I knew what it was. One of them. They had never left. The air inside the RV felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I gripped the wheel tighter. If I stopped driving, I was dead. The figure in the mirror didn't move. Just watched. I had to do something. Now. I clenched my jaw and slammed my foot on the brakes. The RV screeched to a violent halt, tires skidding against the pavement. My body lurched forward, nearly slamming into the dashboard, and behind me, a sickening thud, like something had just hit the floor. I didn't dare look back. With shaking hands, I shoved the RV into drive and floored it, tires squealing as I sped toward the town. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The air inside felt different now, lighter, as if whatever was in here was gone. Or, had it ever been inside at all? Maybe. Maybe it had only been in my head. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I saw the face too late. In the road ahead, illuminated by my headlights, stood a woman. Pale. Still, her eyes locked onto mine the moment I saw her. I swerved, the tires shrieking against the pavement as I narrowly avoided hitting her. The RV veered off the road, crashing into the ditch. For a moment, everything was silent except for my own ragged breathing. I forced myself to look back at the road. She was gone. My hands were shaking, My whole body was trembling. I reached for the door handle, thinking, I have to get out of here. And then, right next to my ear, a whisper. Soft. Familiar. The same voice from before. You shouldn't have looked. Blackness. I woke up in a hospital. The doctor said I had driven off the road, that someone found my RV the next morning, totaled in a ditch. No one else was there. No one had seen a woman. No one had seen anything. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to explain what had really happened. But every time I tried, I couldn't. It's like the words won't come out. And now, every night when I close my eyes, I see them. Watching. Still waiting. I don't know what they want. I don't think I'll ever know. But one thing I do know, they're not done with me yet. Have you ever stopped somewhere thinking you were safe, only to realize you made the worst mistake of your life? I was exhausted. Driving through long, desolate roads in my motorhome, I had been on the road for hours. The night was stretching on endlessly, and my eyes burned with fatigue. I needed to stop. A truck stop appeared on the horizon, small, dimly lit, almost abandoned. It wasn't the ideal place, but it would do. A few semi-trucks were parked in the lot, their drivers likely asleep inside. No movement, no sounds. I pulled in, parked near the edge, locked my doors, and exhaled. The silence was heavier than I liked, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Paranoia. Before turning off the lights, something caught my eye. A truck, further back in the lot, had its cargo doors wide open. Strange. No driver. No workers unloading. Just a gaping black void in the middle of the night. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. My mind was playing tricks on me. I needed sleep. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness pull me in. Then, at 3:17 a.m., I woke up. A loud metallic clang echoed from underneath the motorhome. My pulse jumped. My first thought? Something's wrong with the engine, but engines don't make sounds like footsteps. I grabbed my lantern and a knife I kept near my bed. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The cold night air hit me instantly. The parking lot was still. The truck with the open doors remained untouched, looming in the distance. I crouched and pointed the lantern under the vehicle. Nothing. But the feeling remained. That eerie, undeniable sense that someone was there. Watching. Waiting. I did a slow walk around the motorhome, scanning the area. Nothing but empty pavement and the distant silhouettes of trucks. I shook my head, telling myself to stop being paranoid, and climbed back inside. As I locked the door, the motorhome shifted slightly, as if something had moved beneath it. Then a smell hit me. Thick, metallic, overpowering. My stomach twisted. Blood. And it was coming from inside my motorhome. My breath caught in my throat. The smell was undeniable. Heavy. Suffocating. It made my stomach churn. I scanned the motorhome, trying to pinpoint the source. It wasn't coming from the kitchenette, not the bathroom. Then my gaze fell on the lower storage compartment, the one beneath the bed. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. I kneeled, gripping the handle. My fingers felt stiff, almost unwilling to move. Slowly, I pulled the compartment open. At first, I saw only darkness. Then, something wet. Clumped fabric. I reached for my lantern, my hands trembling as I directed the beam inside. A body. A woman. Crumpled in the tight space. Her pale face frozen in terror. Blood drenched her chest. Her throat slit open in a jagged, merciless cut. Her eyes. They were still open, staring at nothing. I fell backward, gasping. My head spun. My vision blurred. How? How did she get in here? I scrambled away, my heartbeat thundering. That's when I noticed something pressed against her chest. A crumpled piece of paper soaked in blood. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. 4 words. You weren't the first. Then beneath it, in even darker ink, and you won't be the last. The air in the motorhome grew impossibly thick. My instincts screamed at me to run, to drive away, to do something. Then from outside, something thumped against the vehicle. Hard, like a hand slapping against the metal. My pulse roared in my ears. I jumped to my feet, grabbed the knife, and pressed my back against the wall. I listened. Silence. Then, slow, dragging footsteps circled the motorhome. I darted toward the dashboard and fumbled for my keys. I needed to get out. Now. A low creak echoed from above me. My breath hitched. Something was on the roof. Through the windshield, the truck stop looked empty. But in the distance, near the open cargo truck, I spotted a figure standing completely still. Tall, unmoving, watching. The lantern light flickered. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. My blood ran cold. Then, before I could react, something slammed against the side window. A pale face, eyes black and hollow, a twisted grin stretching impossibly wide. Then, it was gone. The motorhome rocked violently, as if something had jumped off the roof. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned the key again. The engine roared to life. My hands locked on the wheel. I slammed my foot on the gas. As I sped toward the exit, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror, a shadowy figure clinging to the back of the motorhome. The rearview mirror showed what I was too afraid to believe. A figure clinging to the back of my motorhome. Not just clinging, crawling. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed harder on the gas, the tires screeching against the pavement. The wind howled outside, but over it I could still hear it. Scratching. Slow, deliberate, nails against metal scraping. I swerved the motorhome left, then right, trying to shake it off. For a moment, the weight shifted, and I thought I had succeeded, until a thump echoed from the roof again. My stomach twisted. I looked up. A dark shape loomed through the sunroof, its fingers pressing against the glass. I had no time to think. I slammed the brakes. The motorhome skidded, tires screaming. The force threw me forward, and I braced myself against the steering wheel. Then, a body flew forward from the roof, landing hard on the pavement ahead of me. For the first time, I got a good look at it. It was human, or at least it used to be. A tall, gaunt man, his skin pale as wax, stretched too tight over his face. His mouth was split at the corners, an unnatural grin carved into his features. He had no lips, just raw, exposed flesh where they should have been. And his eyes, black holes. No light, no soul. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Just lay there, staring up at me. For one heartbeat, I thought it was over. Then, as if some unseen force had yanked him up by invisible strings, he stood. I threw the motorhome into reverse, tires burning against the asphalt. My mind screamed at me to leave, to escape, to never look back. Then my headlights flickered. For a split second, the road ahead turned to complete darkness, and when the lights flicked back on, he was gone. I didn't stop. I drove for miles, my hands shaking so violently that I had to grip the wheel with everything I had. The world outside blurred into streaks of black and gray. My lungs burned from shallow, rapid breaths. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing. No shadowy figures. No crawling shapes. Just emptiness. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a gas station ahead. Bright, populated, safe. I pulled in, stopping near the pumps. My hands were sore from how hard I had been gripping the wheel. My head pounded. I needed air. Stepping out, I felt the cold night breeze against my sweat-drenched skin. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the nightmare I had just left behind. But then, a feeling crept up my spine. A familiar heaviness in the air. The smell of iron. I turned back to the motorhome, my heart hammering. The rear storage compartment, the same one where I had found the first body, was slightly ajar. I knew I hadn't left it like that. With dread curling in my stomach, I stepped forward and pulled it open. Inside, another note. This one was fresh, ink still wet, smudged with something dark. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? I froze. Then a sound. A soft exhale. Directly behind me. The last thing I saw was my own shadow stretching long against the pavement. And another one, taller, leaning in. Blackout. The road stretched endlessly before us, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the Nevada desert. No cars, no signs of life. Just me, Emily, and the vast emptiness around us. "This is it," Emily said, gazing out the window. "Exactly what we wanted." She was right. This trip was supposed to be about freedom, just the two of us exploring, disconnecting from the world. We had saved for years to buy this motorhome, a cozy little escape on wheels. The first few nights were peaceful. We parked in remote spots, cooked under the stars, and listened to the wind howl through the canyons. But on the fourth night, something changed. It was colder than usual inside the motorhome, unnaturally cold. I woke up shivering, even though the heater was on. The silence felt heavy, unnatural, like the world outside had stopped. Then a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible click. I turned to Emily. She was asleep. The noise came again, a faint shifting, like footsteps on gravel. I sat up, peering through the small window above our bed. Nothing, just the desert, just the night. I lay back down, telling myself it was the wind. But when morning came, something wasn't right. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, stretching. Emily was still inside making coffee. Then I saw them. Footprints. They started right at the door of the motorhome and led away into the desert. Perfectly spaced, disappearing into the horizon. My stomach twisted. "Emily!" I called, my voice tight. She stepped outside, still in her pajamas, holding a mug. "What?" I pointed. Her smile faded. "That's weird." We looked at each other, then at the footprints. "They could be ours," she offered. "No," I said. "We never stepped out last night, and look at them. They don't lead to the door, only away from it." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Maybe you just don't remember." I didn't argue. But deep down I knew. That night we triple-checked the locks before going to bed. The wind howled outside. The heater hummed softly. And in the morning, the door was unlocked again. And there were more footprints. This was more than forgetfulness. More than paranoia. Something was wrong. Emily was nervous, but still tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's a malfunction. Maybe the locks are loose. I didn't buy it. "We need to know what's happening," I said. That afternoon, we set up a camera inside the motorhome, aimed directly at the door. I made sure it had a clear view of everything. The entrance, the bed, the tiny kitchen. If anything or anyone was coming inside, we'd catch it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak made my heart pound. Every gust of wind made me tense. But we never heard the door open. When morning came, my throat went dry as I reached for the handle. Unlocked. The same footprint stretched out into the desert just like before. Emily's hands trembled as she grabbed the laptop. "Let's check the footage." We sat side by side watching the playback. For the first few hours, nothing happened, just the two of us asleep in bed. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the screen flickered. Something changed. A shadowy shape blurred into existence right in front of the door. Emily gasped. It was impossible. No one entered. No one came through the door. The figure just appeared, as if it had been there all along but only decided to reveal itself. Then, it turned its head and looked straight at the camera. The moment its gaze met the lens, the video cut to static. The recording resumed seconds later, but the figure was gone. No exit, no movement. I could barely breathe. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. Where did it go? I rewound the footage, played it again, same thing. The figure appeared, stared directly into the camera, and then nothing. Emily grabbed my arm. If it never left, then it's still here. A deep chill ran through me. I turned slowly, scanning the tiny space of the motorhome. Every inch of it was familiar, except now, it didn't feel like ours anymore. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, like someone else was in here hiding in plain sight. Then Emily stiffened. Her eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. A faint, soft breath just behind us. We turned, but no one was there. We ran. Emily shoved the door open and we stumbled out into the cold desert air. The sky was still dark, the horizon barely touched with the first hints of dawn. The ground beneath us felt unsteady, as if the world itself was shifting. The motorhome stood behind us, silent, still. And yet, I felt it. Something inside was watching us. "We have to go," Emily stammered. "We can't stay here." She was right. But where could we go? We were in the middle of nowhere. Miles of barren land stretched in every direction. The nearest town was hours away. A chilling realization hit me. We couldn't leave, not because we were stranded, not because we didn't have options, but because it wouldn't let us. I grabbed Emily's hand. We get in. We drive. We don't stop. She hesitated but nodded. We climbed back inside, slamming the door behind us, locking it even though we knew it wouldn't matter. The engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the darkness. Emily gasped. "The tracks!" I followed her gaze and my blood ran cold. The footprints were back. But this time they didn't start at the door. They started from under our bed. And they were leading straight to where we were standing. A sudden pressure filled the air, like the weight of an unseen force pushing down on us. The lights flickered. The engine died. A whisper brushed my ear. Too close. Too real. "You're not alone." The last thing I saw was Emily's face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then everything went dark. I never imagined that selling our house and living on the road would lead us straight into a nightmare. My wife, Lillian, and I had spent our entire lives saving for retirement, dreaming of an adventure across the country. A motorhome, the open road, freedom. What could go wrong? That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, we found ourselves on a narrow dirt road. The GPS had led us here, promising it was a shortcut to the next town. At first, it seemed fine. The road was a little bumpy, but nothing our motorhome couldn't handle. Then Lillian noticed something. "Frank, that car behind us. It's been following us for a while now." I glanced in the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights trailed us at a steady distance. Probably just another traveler. "Maybe they're heading the same way," I said, brushing off her concern. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to feel uneasy. The car never got closer, never slowed down, just stayed there, a shadow in our rearview mirror. The road was getting worse, potholes deep enough to rattle our bones. The trees on either side seemed to close in, swallowing what little daylight remained. That's when I noticed something else. The car's headlights? They weren't reflecting off any road signs or fences. There was nothing out here but trees, no houses, no intersections. Just us and them. Darkness settled in like a thick fog. Our headlights barely cut through the void ahead. The car behind us still followed, a silent predator lurking in the shadows. "Frank, do something," Lillian whispered, gripping the armrest. I pressed the gas, but the road was too rough to go any faster. The motorhome lurched over a deep pothole, nearly sending us into the ditch. I had to ease up. And the car? It never wavered. That was the moment I truly understood. We weren't just imagining things. Whoever was behind us wasn't just another traveler. They were following us. Lillian reached for her phone. "No signal," she muttered. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough to turn around and find another route. "Let's pull over," I said. "See if they pass us." Lillian didn't like the idea, but what choice did we have? I slowed down, guiding the motorhome toward the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The car behind us slowed down too. My stomach dropped. We sat there for what felt like forever, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the headlights disappeared. Lillian sucked in a breath. Where did they go? I scanned the mirrors. Nothing but darkness. No taillights, no engine sound. Gone. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe they turned onto another path. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I put the motorhome in drive, then headlights appeared in front of us. They weren't gone. They were waiting. My foot slammed on the brake, the motorhome skidding on the loose gravel. The headlights ahead blinded us, illuminating the dust that swirled in the air. "Frank." Lillian's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. My eyes darted between the road in front and the side mirrors. The first car was gone. No taillights, no movement. But now, this one was blocking our way forward. A door creaked open, then another. Silhouettes emerged from the blinding glow. 3 men. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if they had all the time in the world. I reached for the gear shift, ready to throw the motorhome into reverse. Another set of headlights flared to life behind us. I swore under my breath. We were trapped. The men kept walking, their heavy boots crunching against the dirt. One of them held a lantern, swinging it lazily at his side. Another gripped something long and gleaming, a machete. Lillian gasped as they got closer. "What do they want?" A hand slammed against the driver's side window. I nearly jumped out of my seat. A man with a wide grin and dark, hollow eyes peered inside. His teeth were yellowed, his face weathered. He tapped the glass with a dirty fingernail. Then, with a slow, deliberate smile, he spoke. "Welcome to our property." I slammed my foot on the gas. The motorhome lurched forward, but the car blocking our path was too close. I swerved hard, trying to angle around it, but the road was too narrow. The tires spun in the dirt. The men laughed. Lillian was gripping my arm, her breathing shallow. "Frank, we have to..." A metallic clang echoed through the cabin. I turned just in time to see one of them dragging a machete across the side of the motorhome. The steel screeched against the metal, sending a sickening vibration through my bones. Then, another bang, this time on the passenger door. One of them was trying the handle, checking if it was unlocked. Lillian fumbled for her phone again, but I already knew the answer. No service. I yanked open the glove compartment, my fingers fumbling for the small tire iron I kept there. Not much, but better than nothing. A voice outside the window. Low. Amused. "Come on now. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at Lillian. Her face was pale. We couldn't stay here. We had to run. I made a split-second decision. We couldn't stay inside. "Lillian, we're getting out," I whispered. Her eyes widened. "What? No, they're right there." "They're gonna get in either way." I gripped the tire iron, my pulse hammering. "We go through the back now." Another bang against the door. Harder this time. They were getting impatient. I grabbed Lillian's hand and pulled her toward the rear window. She hesitated, but when the sound of metal tearing filled the air, someone trying to pry the door open, she moved faster. I fumbled with the latch, pushing the window up as fast as I could. The cool night air rushed in. "Hurry," I whispered. Lillian climbed out first. I followed, landing hard on the dirt, my knees buckling from the impact. That's when I heard it. The door of the motorhome creaking open. They were in. I grabbed Lillian's arm, pulling her toward the trees. "Run." She didn't need to be told twice. We darted into the darkness, the uneven ground making every step a struggle. Branches scraped my arms. Lillian stumbled, but I caught her before she fell. Laughter echoed behind us. "Look at 'em go," one of the men chuckled. "Like rabbits." I didn't look back. We had to find somewhere to hide. The woods were endless. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every snap of a twig made my heart leap into my throat. Then, just ahead, a structure, a cabin. Small, barely standing, but it was shelter. I grabbed Lillian's hand and pulled her toward it. The wooden steps creaked under our weight as we stumbled onto the porch. I reached for the handle, unlocked. We slipped inside, slamming the door behind us. I locked it, then pressed my back against the wood, breathing hard. Silence. Only our ragged breathing filled the air. Lillian clutched my arm. "Are they?" A crunch outside. My blood ran cold. They were here. Through a gap in the wooden boards, I could see them standing near the tree line, watching. One of them lifted his lantern, the glow casting long shadows over his face. He smiled. "We own these woods too." I scanned the dark room, my breath shallow. The cabin smelled of damp wood and decay, but right now it was the only thing between us and them. Lillian clutched my arm, her fingers ice cold. "Frank, what do we do?" I forced myself to think. The door wouldn't hold forever. If they wanted in, they'd get in. My eyes landed on a rusted hunting knife on the counter. I grabbed it. Better than nothing. A noise. Above us. Lillian's breath hitched. Footsteps on the roof. My grip on the knife tightened. They were circling us, testing us. Then, bang. A window shattered. A lantern crashed inside, rolling across the floor. Flames licked the wooden planks. They were burning us out. I grabbed Lillian's hand. "We run, now." She hesitated, but the smoke was already filling the cabin. We had no choice. I kicked open the back door, dragging her outside. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and suffocating. They were waiting. One of them, tall, wiry, with a twisted grin, stepped forward, blocking our path. He raised his machete. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. The man's grin faltered. The others scattered. Lillian sobbed in relief. I could barely believe it. We were going to live. The police arrived in force, more than a dozen officers combing the area. They found our motorhome stripped and ransacked. But the men, gone. No names, no records, no traces. An officer, a tall man with weary eyes, looked at me. "You're lucky," he muttered. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened out here." I shuddered. How many others weren't as lucky? We never took another dirt road again. And every time I see a car following too closely, I wonder if they ever stopped hunting. People go missing here all the time, and last night I almost became one of them. I had always been fascinated by urban legends, especially those about mysterious disappearances. When I heard about a remote national park with a history of vanished hikers, I knew I had to see it for myself. Maybe it was arrogance, or maybe just curiosity disguised as bravery. Either way, I packed up my motorhome and headed into the forest. The drive took longer than expected, and by the time I arrived at the campground, the sun was already sinking behind the mountains. The place was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. As I parked and stepped outside, a strange feeling crept over me. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. Shrugging it off, I set up camp, made a quick dinner, and locked my motorhome for the night. I told myself it was just another camping trip. But something in the air, something I couldn't quite name, felt off. I don't know what time it was when the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the motorhome door. Not wind, not an animal. Someone was out there. I sat up, my heart hammering. Through the small window I saw him, a ranger standing in the dim moonlight. His face was shadowed under his hat, but something about the way he stood, rigid, alert, made my stomach tighten. I hesitated, but finally cracked the window open. "Can I help you?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a low, urgent voice, he said, "Lock the doors. Whatever happens, do not step outside." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Then came the whispers, faint, drifting through the woods. Not words, just sounds. And then, movement. Shadows shifting between the trees. Too tall, too thin, moving too smoothly. My breath caught. I wasn't alone. Something was out there. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. Outside, the shadows moved, gliding, twisting unnaturally between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but the longer I watched, the clearer they became. Tall, too tall. Their arms were too long, their necks too thin. They didn't walk. They drifted, silent as the night itself. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone. No signal. Of course, one of the figures stopped just outside my motorhome, directly in my line of sight. I could barely make out its face, or what should have been a face. It was wrong, like someone had smeared the details away, leaving only a vague, unsettling impression of human features. Then it moved, not away, toward me. The moment I saw it lean toward the window, I threw myself backward, slamming the curtain shut. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the lock on the door. And then, the scratching started. Soft at first, just a light dragging sound along the side of the motorhome. Then harder, more insistent, like fingernails scraping against metal. I pressed my back against the wall, every muscle in my body locked in place. Whatever was out there, it wanted in. The scratching continued for what felt like hours. I sat there, gripping a flashlight like a weapon, listening to the unnatural sounds crawling over my motorhome. The whispers, the faint taps against the windows, the feeling of being surrounded, and then silence. I didn't move. I didn't trust it. Silence can be a trap. Eventually, exhaustion took over. My eyes grew heavy, my body numb with fear. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up and it was morning, at first I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe it was just a nightmare brought on by isolation. But then I stepped outside and saw the scratches. Deep, jagged claw marks ran along both sides of the motorhome. Dozens of them overlapping, like multiple hands had tried to tear it open. A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the trees. Empty. No figures. No movement. I took a shaky breath and made a decision. I needed to find that ranger. But when I reached the ranger station, it was abandoned. No signs of life. No recent footprints. Just a single object left behind on the ground. A rusted badge, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, and that's when I saw the name. Officer Daniel Carter, missing since 1978. My stomach dropped. I stared at the rusted badge in my hands, my mind racing. 1978. That couldn't be right. The ranger I saw last night looked real. Alive. I turned back to the empty station. The building was old, but not abandoned long enough to match the date on the badge. The dust-covered windows, the peeling paint. It all looked neglected, but not decades-old neglected. And yet, there was no sign of life. No supplies, no radio, no logs. Just an empty desk, a few cobwebs, and the badge of a man who shouldn't exist anymore. A cold realization settled over me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I sprinted back to my motorhome, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I jumped inside and locked the door, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. And I saw them. Lined up at the edge of the trees, just where the forest met the dirt road. Dozens of them. Tall, thin figures standing perfectly still, watching. Their faces were wrong, blurred, hollow. Some looked almost human, others completely inhuman. And in the middle of them, standing just a few feet ahead, was the ranger, Officer Carter. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there staring at me, like he was waiting for something. I didn't wait to find out what. I slammed the engine into drive, tires kicking up dirt as I sped down the narrow road. The figures didn't chase me. They didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on me, tracking my every move. Only when I reached the highway did I allow myself to breathe again. Hours later, I pulled into a gas station, hands still shaking. I needed answers. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I approached the cashier, a middle-aged man who looked like he'd seen his fair share of travelers. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Do you know anything about the old ranger station up in the national park?" He looked up, his expression shifting immediately. "You were up there?" His voice was flat, almost disbelieving. I nodded, suddenly uneasy. There hasn't been a ranger working that area in over 40 years. I felt my skin crawl. "Are you sure?" I saw one. He warned me not to go outside." The cashier didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, he sighed. "A lot of folks say that. They see a ranger, they hear warnings, then they disappear." I swallowed hard. But I made it out. The man didn't look convinced. He just shook his head. "Did you?" I left without another word. But when I got home, I checked my motorhome one last time. The scratches were still there. The proof was still there. But the badge, it was gone. And in its place on my dashboard was something else. Something I knew I hadn't put there. A small, rusted nameplate. Camper 132, missing since 2024. My name wasn't on it. Yet. Arizona. Miles and miles of nothing. The kind of place where the sky stretches forever and the land looks untouched, ancient, like it's holding secrets no one should ever uncover. I was driving our rented RV with my best friends, Nate, Liam, and Jess. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, an escape from our boring routines. No Wi-Fi, no traffic, just us and the open desert. As we drove deeper into nowhere, we passed a rundown gas station with an old man sitting outside. He didn't wave. He just watched us. His expression was unreadable, but something about it made my stomach turn. "Creepy," Jess muttered. "We should have asked for directions," Liam joked. "Maybe he'd tell us where all the ghosts are." Nate laughed, but I didn't. I had a weird feeling about this place. By sunset, we found a spot near an abandoned road, far from everything. We built a fire and settled in. The desert was eerily quiet. No wind, no insects, just the crackling of the flames. Then we noticed him, a man standing in the distance. He wasn't moving, just watching us. His features were hard to see in the dim light, but he wore something dark, maybe a cloak. We all went silent. After a few seconds, he turned and disappeared into the night. No one spoke for a long time. That should have been our first warning. The fire burned low, casting shadows that danced against the RV's metal walls. "All right," Nate sighed, standing up. "I need to take a leak." "Watch out for rattlesnakes," Liam joked. Nate smirked, grabbed a flashlight, and walked off into the darkness. A few minutes passed. Then 10. I frowned. "He's taking a while." Jess checked her phone flashlight. "Maybe he..." A blood-curdling scream echoed from the darkness. We all jumped to our feet. "Nate?" I called, my voice shaking. No answer. Liam grabbed a flashlight and we ran towards the sound. The desert stretched out before us, endless and empty. Then, footsteps. We turned back to the RV and there he was. Nate stood by the door facing us. His face was pale, his eyes wide. Something was wrong. Jess reached for him. "Are you okay?" His voice came out flat, almost robotic. "Get inside, now." We hesitated. "Don't open the door, no matter what." Then he stepped inside and locked it. Confused, we followed him. That's when I glanced out the window and saw it. A figure, Tall, thin, unnatural, standing far in the desert. Its face was grinning, watching. We locked the RV doors. The air inside felt heavy, suffocating. "Nate," I whispered. "What happened?" He sat on the couch, staring at the floor, his hands trembling. Liam stepped forward. "Dude, talk to us. What did you see?" Nate didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, erratic. Jess peeked through the window. Her entire body stiffened. "There's someone out there." I moved next to her and looked. It wasn't someone. A thing stood in the distance. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs impossibly long. Its skin looked stretched, almost translucent under the moonlight. Its face was worse. It was grinning, but the smile was too wide, too unnatural, like it had been carved into its skull. And its eyes, black, endless holes, were locked onto us. Then it moved. Not walked. Moved. 1 second it was far away. The next it was closer. Jess gasped, covering her mouth. The thing didn't step. It just shifted, like a glitch in reality. Then it spoke, not with its mouth, with its voice inside our heads. "I see you." The RV lights flickered. The air turned ice cold, and before we could react, something slammed against the side of the RV. Hard. The RV shook violently. Jess screamed. Liam cursed. Nate was unmoving. I grabbed his shoulders. "We have to go. We have to drive out of here." He looked up, his face blank. "You can't run." A loud bang. The thing hit the RV again. Liam lunged for the driver's seat. "Screw this, we're leaving." As he reached for the keys, everything stopped. The shaking, the noise, the flickering lights, silence. Hesitantly, I peeked through the window. The thing was gone. The desert was empty. The air was still. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Jess whispered, "We should go now." I turned to agree. Nate was gone. The RV was locked. The windows were shut. There was no way he could have left. But his seat was empty, and on the floor where he had been sitting was a handprint in the dust, too large to be his. None of us spoke. The RV door was still locked from the inside. The windows were closed. Nate was just gone. Jess clutched my arm. "Where is he?" I shook my head, my mind racing. He was right here. Liam's face was pale. "We need to get the hell out of here. Now." I didn't argue. He jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Silence. "No, no, no," Liam muttered, trying again. Nothing. That's when I saw it. Out the window, strange symbols were burned into the dirt outside. A circle, like something had been scorched into the ground. And leading away from it, footprints. But not normal footprints. They were long, thin, with only 3 toes. They trailed into the darkness towards the old reservation land. I swallowed hard. I think it took him." Jess started crying. Liam banged the steering wheel, and then we heard it. A low, distorted sound, like laughter, but broken, static-like, and it was coming from every direction. Then I saw it, someone standing outside. I froze. It was Nate. He was facing away from us, standing perfectly still. "Nate," Jess whispered, her voice cracking. He didn't move. I swallowed. "Nate, if you can hear me, say something." No response. I reached for the door handle. Liam grabbed my wrist. "Don't. That's not him." Jess was shaking her head violently. "We can't just leave him out there." I hesitated. Then, Nate moved. Not like a person. His body twisted, his spine bending at an unnatural angle as he turned his head, a full 180 degrees. His mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin. His eyes, pure black voids. Then, he spoke. But it wasn't his voice. I never left. The lights inside the RV flickered. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came out in a visible cloud. Nate, or whatever this thing was, stepped forward. Jess let out a muffled scream. Then, in a blink, he was gone. The air went still. No wind. No sound. And then, a hand touched my shoulder. But I was inside the RV and the door was still locked. My body froze. I could feel the pressure of fingers on my shoulder, cold, unnaturally long. I spun around, but no one was there. Jess was pressed against the RV wall, her breathing ragged. Liam gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "Start the engine," I muttered. Liam turned the key. The engine roared to life. We didn't question it, didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward, speeding down the dark road. I glanced back through the window. Nate was standing in the middle of the road, watching us leave. His eyes, they weren't black anymore. They were filled with fear. And then, just before he vanished into the darkness, he lifted his hand and pointed directly at me. That's when I heard it. A whisper, deep inside my head. "You brought it with you." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was sitting in the RV with us.